All right, and welcome back to another episode of Raul's World of Sense. I am Raul. This time around, we're going to be talking about the Doepfer A143-9 voltage-controlled quadrature LFO. We're going to be talking basics about what this module does, how you can kind of utilize it in your setup, and then getting a brief look at some of the outputs that come from this module. But before we do that, I did want to talk about what distinguishes this module from some of the other modules that we've seen that produce sine waves. Now, according to the website, it does say that this is sort of a derivative of a module that Doepfer is planning for the future as a release, a VCO, I believe, that's going to have a foundation for through zero. I'm not going to get too much into a discussion of that since it's kind of in the works, but it is kind of intriguing. If you want to read more about it, go out on the internet and find some information on it. But up until now, the sine waves that we've heard, like the ones in the A111, the A110 right here, the A145, the A147, all those sine waves that we've been hearing have primarily been coming from oscillators that were using either a triangle wave as a core or a sawtooth core. Now, this module uses something a little bit different to help give you a lot smoother sine waves. And in addition, it allows you to kind of utilize a quadrature setup, that is sine waves that are out of phase from each other for special effects, like, you know, you can do kind of panning and a quadraphonic setup. You could use it for barbopole effects, lots of different things. So that's basically what I wanted to say about that. At any rate, let's go ahead and jump right in to the basics and go from there. So up at the top, you'll see kind of a frequency control up here, and this angle is a little odd, so just trust me. You can see frequency up here, and from all the way down at the bottom is your minimum frequency, and all the way up at the top is your maximum. Pretty straightforward, very similar to some of the other LFOs that we've seen in the past. There's also a CV input right here that's going to allow you to voltage control the frequency of this oscillator. So if you want to get another LFO and then pipe it in here, you can control it. Now, immediately below that, we have a second CV input right there. This one has an attenuator immediately to the right of it, but it is a little bit of a different attenuator. This one actually has a polarizer built in. So up at the center is going to be your 0 point. Over on the right, clockwise position is going to be +5, and then over in the counterclockwise position is going to be -5. So if you want to invert the CV that's coming in, you can use that to do it. One thing I did want to note about the CV input here, because they do make a very valid note on the website about it, is that it's not accurate to 1 volt per octave. So you can trigger it with notes if you wanted to, but it's not going to necessarily accurately track. So therefore, it kind of falls in the experimental category. Just a kind of a useful little note to know if you're planning on utilizing this in your setup. Let's see. At any rate, immediately below that, you have a range switch. This kind of operates very similar to the A145. Over in the left position, you have a low frequency output. In the middle, you have high frequency. And over on the right, you have kind of the middle frequency. And then you have some LEDs underneath there. It's going to indicate the polarity for you. So plus, of course, is going to be positive. Minus is going to be negative. And then down here at the bottom are the exciting outputs. You have 0 degree sine, which is your basic sine coming out. And then you have kind of a phase shifted version at 90 degrees cosine. And then immediately below that, you have a 180 degree sine, which is basically an inverted sine. And then at the very bottom, you have a 270 degree cosine wave. Now, I'm not going to get too much into a discussion about trigonometry or anything like that, but I am going to show these waves to you, and then we'll talk a little bit about what this is going to mean going forward, at least in terms of what these degrees being different can kind of make or break you in your patch. So let's go ahead and get a look at some of these waves. I have my quadrature over here set in the high position. So I'm going to go ahead and patch into my first input of my oscilloscope over there the 0 degree sine wave. There we go. And you should be able to see that on the oscilloscope. And now let's take a look at the 90 degree wave over here. There we go. And you can see it's kind of almost just moved over a little bit right there. And so that's actually what's happening, is it's kind of moved out of phase from the other one. Let's take a look at the 180 degree wave. So I'm going to patch into 180. There we go. And let's take a look at that on our oscilloscope. Now you can see it's kind of intertwined, almost like a strand of DNA, as you sometimes see. And so these are going to be 180 degrees out of phase. Now this is a very important number because when waves are 180 degrees out of phase, that's when you start to experience something called destructive interference. Oddly enough, I was just taking a course and we kind of ran into this discussion of constructive interference, destructive interference. When things are in phase, for the most part, you have constructive interference. That is, they increase the level of each other. But when something is destructive, they actually sort of cancel each other out. Now you can have different levels of this. That would be, everything between 179 all the way down to 1 degree from the two waveforms. As long as they're not at that 180 point, then they're not canceling each other out. But that's just something to know. In kind of your modular travels, you might run into a situation where you patch a couple waves together and you notice, hey, it just got quiet. Well, more than likely there's some probably phase differences that are causing your waves to cancel each other. But over at our oscilloscope, that's kind of what we're looking at, is we're looking at waves that are 180 degrees out of phase. So if we were listening to these, which we will a little bit later, you would actually experience kind of almost little or no signal with those two guys talking to each other. Now let's kind of jump over to the 270 cosine. So I'm going to unpatch that, go right into 270, and let's take a look at that. And you can see that one is pretty close to the same, but it is 270 degrees out of phase. So it shifts all the way forward. Okay, so now that we've gotten a brief look at that and the waveforms that are being output, in the next segment, we're going to be taking a listen to what some of these can do for you, how they affect one another, such as the destructive interference I was talking about a little while ago. And then we're going to go a little further and kind of see what kind of interesting demonstrations we can come up with. So I hope that you found this little discussion of the basics of this module fairly useful. It was interesting kind of going through it. At any rate, hope to see you for the next segment, and keep on patching out there.